Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for RunOnce.com. Today I want to look in Vision and focus on playing 3-bet pots. We're looking specifically at small blind versus button, 6-max, but adjusting your strategy based on board texture, because I think there are some things, and actually specifically I want to talk about, I want to talk about the boards that we use a potting range on. Because I think I've encountered a lot of players who kind of use the same sizing across a lot of different boards, and I think it's a big mistake to miss out on some potting. So here I just loaded a King Jack 6 board, two-tone. You'll notice that basically don't do any potting and don't do that much checking. To be honest, I would probably simplify this strategy to something like half potting 100% of my range, even though it's not quite perfectly solver approved. I don't give up any information edge that way, and I think the cost of betting these 19% of hands, especially when we're including these 2% of potting hands in the half pot range, I just don't think it's very costly. But anyways, I want to get to the potting boards, so I'll do that by, I guess first let's look at the boards we check a lot. Makes sense, you're checking, or at least these couple on the top make sense. These aren't really boards you want to have to do a lot of potting on, and if you're not going to do a lot of potting and you're half potting flop, you get into some uncomfortable situations on a wide variety of turns that complete straight draws and flush draws, and you have to act first, being out of position, so it can get a little bit dicey. The King 6-5 is interesting. I think probably it must be due to the prevalence of the King and Queen advantage, because here come queens next. But I am a little bit, I guess actually, it could be that, but it's also, we don't flop much 2-pair on these boards as the 3-better, whereas the button raiser, calling our 3-bet does flop a fair bit of 2-pair. So that would be my guess, and perhaps we could dive into those later, but I want to start by talking about these boards. And so the boards that we do a lot of potting on, and you'll see we do a whole lot of potting here on 10-5 deuce, basically. I mean, it's effectively 100% potting. We're potting 88%, and we're half potting 9%. We're only checking 2%. You could just pot your full range here and be okay. You'll notice a pattern that these are generally, they're all rainbow boards. We don't get to the first non-rainbow board is an ace-high, very connected board that we do a fair bit of potting on. For the most part, we're talking about rainbow boards and ones that are, either somewhat disconnected. Well, I guess they're all kind of disconnected, but all also contain one very low card at least. So a deuce is going to be the most common card that we're looking to pot on. So, for example, or the reason for that is that just button's not raised calling many deuce X hands. So I guess if we hop over here to the ranges and look at hand classes for each position, what's the way this spot works is that out of position is going to have the big overpair range advantage. So I could break down by category. So out of position is paired. Out of position is unpaired 20% of the time, and these pairs that out of position has are mostly going to be over pairs and top pair. Yeah, so over pair 54%, top pair 17.5%, and only 4% 5x or deuce X. So out of position has top pair or better almost 80% of the time. Let's call it whatever, 77. I forget exactly what it looked like there. And actually what's interesting is you'll note that the half potting that it's doing 9% of the time, it's including sets. I mean, it makes sense that it's including sets and air in there, so maybe that's not that interesting. Let's just say once we pot, it's the most common action. Let's load classes for the in position player. And because, again, of missing deuce X combos in really both players' ranges, but imposition here. I wouldn't expect button to have many 2-pair hands. So yeah, 5.6% of the time 2-pair, 5% set, which is actually higher than I expected by quite a bit. And then, unpaired over a third of the time, 1 pair a little over half the time. And while it is, it is going to include a fair amount of overpairs, they're generally going to be lower overpairs than the 3-better is going to have. So if we want to, whatever, a lot more like, so ace, I don't want to do hand classes. So ace is 3% for imposition. King is going to be 7%. Queen, 6%. And actually you can see here that queen is mostly folding. That's just due to lack of equity. So so basically the reason that this spot works this way, and so many of these other boards do, is that aces and kings are very happy to get all the money in here against the range that has to put it in. But they also want to reduce the SPR. So basically, out of position, you want to pot this flop, and if they want to peel with a 1-pair hand, they can, and then they, if they hit 2-pair against your aces, you're going to get it in kind of bad on the turn. But you want to charge them the maximum to try to hit that 2-pair, because when if they are going to call, I guess we can make up a hand like that I'm actually not sure what it would do. So yeah, so queen jack 6-5, fold without a backdoor flush draw. It's calling with a backdoor flush draw pretty much always. But what happens then is, they call. Turn is 7, and then they fold, and you've made this full pot size bet, and it makes it makes them kind of unable or indifferent to continuing. So unable to continue without the backdoor flush draw, and getting pretty close to indifferent with some of the single backdoor flush draw hands. So that's really the purpose of this bet. And I think what happens is a lot of people will just simplify and just like, you'll notice at the beginning of the video I talked about simplifying that is good. This is, I think, simplifying that is not good. So they'll simplify to have just half pot range only on a whole bunch of boards. And what happens here then is when you do half pot, it's actually really bizarre to me how it's now folding this hand to half pot but not full pot. That doesn't make any sense. I guess, no, I can't really make sense of that. I guess it must be that you run into like the way that out of position is constructed its half pot range, is that imposition would rather have, I just actually want to explore this a little bit, would rather have gut shots than 1-pair hands because you're up against a more polarized range of air and sets. Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps those blockers are not particularly useful. It's still kind of strange. Oh no, you're still just calling most 1-pair. There must be something about queen jack 6-5 specifically that isn't great. But you can see here they can call most of their 1-pair hands profitably. And then by the time they do hit a turn, so let's say we get the whatever, 9 of spades turn, now SPR is over 1.5, and so you're left here with actually, yeah, we'll load classes here. You're left here with a kind of uncomfortable spot with your overpairs where you just kind of have to rip it in, I would imagine, with most of them. But yeah, overpairs mostly do, not all. 25% are checking. And there's some half potting in there, which I would simplify that out of the strategy. But now when they get it in significantly worse, because obviously, well, now there are more draws present, NIP can actually use some positional advantage on the river by calling turn. But more importantly, like now when you're up against 2-pair, your equity is pretty bad, and you've let a lot of 1-pair hands call cheaply so that when they miss their 2-pair draw and don't pick up additional equity, they can fold, having only lost half pot on the flop. But now when they call, they have the extra upside of getting it in very good on the turn. So you're charging them less for the times they miss, and you're I guess they're making the same amount for the times they hit, but they're able to get their money in better, just have more visibility generally. So if we look at I want to go back to the flop here and other boards. They're all going to be pretty much the same. When you get into boards like, let's see, I'm looking for some rainbow boards that are a bit different. Like, I guess 10-9-5 is a good example. On a board like this, the kind of breakdown of, let's just look at the breakdown of hand classes. This is what I very much like doing. I guess out of position is going to have a somewhat similar range, more draws here. And it's going to be in position who kind of has a much different range on this board. So here, mostly 1-pair. Fewer unpaired hands, and actually I would imagine that a lot of them have a draw. Straight. Yeah, basically they all have a straight draw, of course, because your range is very well connected. So there are a couple things going on here. First of all, in position is going to have more 2-pair, more pair plus draw, more high equity hands that are quite comfortable calling a larger bet. But perhaps equally important is the fact that out of position is going to actually handle turns very well. So there aren't very many bad turns for out of position's range where out of position is really hurting. Obviously, any card, jack or higher, out of position hits reasonably well. Even an 8 out of position connects with reasonably well. And I would say like 7 and 6 are maybe the two most worrisome cards, and we can perhaps look at that in a moment. And then, of course, 4, 3, and deuce, OOP is not worried about for the same reason. It's not worried about them on the flop. So actually, part of why we were potting the previous board, 10-5 deuce, was to kind of deny our opponent a potential playability advantage, or I don't know if I'd call it an advantage, but some aspect, of playability advantage. But here, that's a little bit less of a concern. So now if we, we'll pot again. Let's load the impositions range. I probably should have written this down. I don't remember how often IP had 2-pair on 10-5 deuce. But we'll be able to see here at least. Maybe I'll get reminded. But yeah, so 6.5 set, 9.5 2-pair. I think it might have been close to 5 and 5, or something in that range. So more 2-pair, and we didn't look at this specifically, but the 1-pair hands are going to have more additional equity quite often. So this is still, note that this is still a flop that does a lot of potting, that out of position does a lot of potting on. But when you compare it to, the ones we looked at first, it's doing, go back. When, compared to the ones we were looking at first, it's got a lot less potting. However, if we go down to, the boards with very little potting, you're going to see, here's 10-9 deuce, which is not that different. 10-9 5, 10-9 deuce actually probably, we could just find 10-9 5, I think. Okay, we'll just sort by 10 high. So 10-9 deuce up here is doing quite a bit of potting, 10-9 5, a bit less. When you go down here, 10-9 deuce only doing 23% of potting, and there are a couple of different 10-9 deuce boards, and 10-9-5 doing a little bit less at 21, and that's just due to out of position having more flush draws as well. So even more board coverage as the turns roll off, more high equity hands, and also your driest overpairs now on a 10-9 deuce flush draw board, or 10-9-5 flush draw board for that matter, are less excited to get it in. Your equity is not as crushing as on 10-5 deuce rainbow, when you're only beat, under 15% of the time. And your opponent doesn't have any high equity, or not any, but very many high equity draws. So you'll see, I noticed on 10-9-5 that OOP or IP was folding to pot 52% of the time. I'm curious what it is here. It's also 52%. So in both cases, it's a little bit more folding than 1- alpha, but that's just due to the makeup of out of positions range. The reason that in a lot of spots you don't want to overfold is that you incentivize the other player to kind of, overbluff essentially. And we could see here that even at folding at folding only 52%, I guess, OOP is basically always betting. So you wouldn't really incentivize if you fold more. They just go from betting 98% to betting 100% of the time, which is effectively the same strategy. They don't gain that much EV by being able to make that adjustment. So let's take a look at the 10-9 deuce two-tone. I'm I'm jumping around here with no plan, but here we are. So hand classes for out of position. I'm assuming that we want a half pot for value, a lot of kind of multi-component hands. So ace, queen, jack, 10 with a flush draw, stuff like that. And actually maybe some. Okay, so we see sets are always half potting. Obviously, there are hands that have equity against sets that we're letting draw, slightly more cheaply. But first of all, it's a pretty small part of our range, so we don't want to shape our strategy around it. But second of all, we always have additional board coverage with sets because we can always pair the board even if draw hits, and sets really, really want to make one pair hands call, one pair with no draw or just a gut shot. No pair is, so we're doing all of our pure bluffing for half pot. I guess that makes sense. We're doing a lot of pure bluffing, and on a board this dynamic, we're probably not pot folding much at all. So when we pot, get jammed on, we're only folding 9%. So yeah, it makes sense that our pure bluffs go into the small bet range. And we do have dry two pair potting more. I'm assuming it's dry. It's got to be, yeah. So with a flush draw and a straight draw, it's always half potting. With a flush draw, no straight draw, it's only half potting. With an open end or no flush draw, it actually does a little bit of potting, but mostly small betting. And then with no draw, doing more potting, no draw, but a flush blocker doing more potting. Actually, flush blocker plus straight draw is doing more potting, which I don't totally understand why, but not a big deal. So let's take a look at a few turns here. I guess we'll just quickly glance at imposition strategy because we're here. But I imagine boards like this are actually not too confusing for the player who's defending. So you just know how much equity you have. Yeah, I guess one thing that's very interesting to note is that sets are mostly slow playing. And I think most players would not be slow playing their sets. And so that's actually something that's very important to note. Two pair, doing more raising, top two specifically. It makes sense that bottom two and top and bottom don't do as much jamming because they're, in very bad shape against stronger hands and are I kind of view them as drawing for a clean turn. Also, sets are not enough slow plays in and of themselves to kind of protect us from in position from getting just like kind of crushed on an offsuit 4 turn, for example. So it's important to keep some 2-pair hands such that out of position can't go for value as thinly and can't bluff as often on those bricks. We need some board coverage on bricks. I'm still a little surprised to see sets calling this often. I guess it's because of the makeup of out of position's range. So remember, out of position is potting 21-ish% of the time, and then mostly small betting. And the small betting range contains the kind of pure bluffs, the low equity bluffs, and the high equity combo hands. And so sets, obviously they're happy to get it in against a combo hand, but they're really unhappy to make all the air in OOP's range fold, especially not just because like you want them to barrel it off, but a hand like Ace King Jack 5 with a single heart or something might turn the ace and just rip it in, and then you're quite happy that you slow played 9-9 rather than made that hand fold, etc., etc. So that makes some sense to me. I think if OOP only had one sizing on a board this dynamic, I would maybe expect sets to play slightly more aggressively, but I could just be wrong about that. They might want to keep in stuff more often. They might want to slow play and worry less about protection than I assumed. Certainly on like a 10-5 deuce rainbow board, if OOP had a half pot range that it used, sets would want to slow play 100% of the time or pretty close to it. So let's take a look at some turns. This is not quite the board that I was talking about, the same board with rainbow board. But I want to take a look at which turns are better and worse for out of position and how out of position is going to play them. So the worst turns are the 8 and the 7 offsuit, makes a lot of sense. 6 offsuit, pretty bad as well. The 10 and the ace, so these are obviously high check frequency, but I don't believe that is because they are particularly bad turns for out of position, or at least this bad. Not as bad as 8, 7, or 6 offsuit. They are just in general, I think, passive turns. So anytime that a flush comes and the board pairs, both players play kind of passively. And the reason for that is your flushes don't need protection. Basically, none of your value hands need protection. And your flushes don't really want to go 2 streets for value very often. I mean, some of them do, some of them don't. But they gain from keeping in dead hands. And yeah, your boats obviously your boats do more of the betting, but you kind of, I believe, center your value range more around boats, play more passive with flushes, and obviously you trap some boats as well, and just on the whole play more passively because, well, it's maybe let's just explore it too so I don't mis-explain it. So we will see what out of position does with each hand class, I would imagine. So flushes. I mean, everything's pretty passive. Flushes are betting 25% of the time, and only nut flushes. So king high flushes are iffy on going for value here across 2 streets. Like, they probably can, but it ends up being higher EV not to. Queen high, jack high. Basically, queen high and lower flushes are too weak to go bet for value, or just close to it. So you don't have a lot of hands that want to go 2 streets for value. So you have 6% full houses and, let's just call it, we'll just look at the ace high flushes. So 18%. So 25% of hands, let's call it a quarter of hands that want to go two streets for value. But they also, you need them in all your ranges. You need to protect your checking range, your check call range, your check raise range, your betting range. And so you got to distribute those. And yeah, you just want to keep in the dead hands. Blocker effects are pretty important too, because if we have the nut flush, that's two hearts our opponent doesn't have, one being, of course, the ace. And so we get more folds that way. And once we bet and they call, if we have 10-9, means they're more likely to have had a draw, which of course could be a flush, but it could also be a straight draw. And if we have the flush, they're more likely to have had a straight draw, or 9-8-6, which is obviously a straight draw plus pair. Some things that we want to keep them in with, let them hit, or let them bluff. So that's just a passive turn in general. I don't think it's, and we'll see imposition probably play pretty passively as well, although it looks like as high as 42% bet. This is higher than I expected. So, okay. So imposition does have more full houses, 14%. And I don't recall out of positions flushes, but yeah, it's basically the full house advantage goes to IP. And that's just due to the overpair advantage being OOP. So OOP just having a lot of ace, ace, king, king. And obviously OOP also betting some air on the flop and IP folding air. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So maybe is a worse turn than I thought. Similarly, as we look at the high check frequency turns, the ace is interesting. I think the reason the ace plays passively, well, first of all, it is somewhat bad for out of position because as far as flush draws go, OOP is going to have more nut flush draws than in position. So when the ace hits, that removes a lot of the flushes that out of position can have compared to that, like the flushes that OOP has a range advantage in. So I guess we might as well just break down for each player. 27% flushes and 12% nuts. Whereas IP has, I'm going to guess, over 30% flushes for sure, 35 even. And then probably similar percent nuts. Oh no, I'm way wrong. So 27%. And, okay, so no real advantage here. So then, it's not that. I'm wrong about that. What it must be is that OOP has a lot of ace X, and ace X does not want to bluff, and would really like imposition to check back. So OOP wants to protect all of its ace X hands, and I guess a fair amount of king king also that really doesn't want to face aggression. Protect it with the with its flushes. Yeah, 15% top pair. Okay. Anyways, that's my quick take on it. If we get back to any turn and head over to the board overview, let's look at a few more of the passive turns. It looks like, yeah, offsuit straight cards. The pots, as expected, offsuit 3s, 4s, 5s, and offsuit aces makes a lot of sense. Just shoving the money in quite a bit, I think, for obvious reasons. And it's interesting. There's a huge drop off between, like, in betting frequency. Let's look at it this way. Okay, offsuit deuces, offsuit aces, offsuit 3s, offsuit 4s. Interestingly, board pairs. Offsuit board pairs make sense, especially the 9 more than the 10. And then, pretty big drop off here in betting frequency, down to 51 from 70. As we've gone through all of those undercards and board pairs. So flushes, we're only using small sizing pretty much. 6, we still are potting, and I think that's because it only brings one straight, and while our opponent will have that straight, like, I'm not going to go look through it, but something like 10% of the time, perhaps a bit more, it's still not often enough to prevent us from ripping in a bunch of hands that happen to be beat by a straight but are still good hands. Ripping them in for value, that is. And then we looked at the lowest. So the highest betting frequency. Cool, we talked about all that. And then highest small bet frequency, obviously offsuit board pairs. And then it looks like the low flushes, so the cards that are good for our range otherwise, that we do a lot of potting on, but that complete the flush, we do a lot of small betting. And I'm actually very curious to see if out of position is continuing to bet small with 2-pair type hands. And so it's trying to leverage the 2-pair advantage and even 1-pair advantage. So, okay, a lot of bluffing. Not a lot of bluffing. We only have 7.5% unpaired hands. Fair amount of betting with flushes, probably because we have a lot of ace high. Yeah, you can see we have more ace high flushes than any other flush by quite a bit. That's due to the makeup of our pre-flop range. We are continuing to bet with interestingly, not interesting. It makes sense. Bottom set, like sets that don't block 2-pair or block Queen Jack 10, can get more value. Top set does more checking because we run into more flushes and missed straight draws and things like that. 1-pair, I mean, these are bluffs. And 2-pair, interestingly, it likes betting bottom 2, but not the higher 2 pairs. I think that's because equity denial is a little more valuable, and OOP wants some board coverage on river board pairs, but I'm not entirely certain about that. Let's see with no flush blocker. Yeah, still betting a lot of the weak 2 pairs. I don't know exactly what the reason for that is. My guess is it's more equity denial plus having 10% equity against a flush when you do get called. So that makes sense to me. Anyways, we did veer off topic quite a bit. My goal was to make sure that you're potting the boards that you should. And obviously you can look at that in Vision if you have a subscription. I want to real quick, so we talked about all of these low rainbow boards. Look at some potting on boards that are not low. So I guess we'll go with ace 10-9 and see how OOP constructed strategy here. So ace high board, just doing a ton of betting, basically never checking. I would never check. But doing a lot of potting. Presumably this is, so you do want to do a lot of potting with sets, which is counterintuitive to some people. But this board is really dynamic, and we do have top set 19% of the time, which is a huge amount of the time. And that hand wants to put a lot of money in. Interestingly, the lower sets pot less often. I would not have expected that. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure why that would be. And then 1-pair hands, you can see like it's actually spanning it's betting a bunch of the different ones. I want to see how often it's bet calling. So straight draw with flush blocker, open ender, no flush draw. So yeah, we got some wraps. So like a hand like ace 8-7, I guess it's pot folding. Oh no, it's small bets that. Sorry. Yeah, I guess ace queen jack it's probably just going to go with. So let's say we pot, get repotted, and we have ace queen jack. Yeah, never folding. Let's say we have ace king jack, never folding. Just too much equity against top 2. So it makes sense that it wants to do a lot of potting because these hands would like to deny equity and have enough equity to get it in right now, but have some tricky playability on a number of turns. So we'll just look at ace King Jack specifically, you'll notice that hearts are going to bet smaller more often, especially if it has 3 hearts, especially if it has the nut flush draw. But then, like, yeah, no flush draw. It's doing a ton of potting with Ace King Jack. It just wants to end the hand and get it in now while it can, and deny equity. So I am going to wrap up here, and what I will kind of leave you with is to make sure that on these low rainbow boards, especially containing a wheel card, you're doing a lot of potting is out of position. Don't just kind of mindlessly half pot or whatever sizing you use with your full range, or like across all board textures. This is a very important element of playing this spot correctly. That I think, and there are a lot of spots for those who've watched a number of my videos. There are a whole bunch of spots in PLO and in poker in general where I actually don't think it's that important that you get the sizing right. I think as long as you have a reasonable strategy with the sizing you're choosing, there are a lot of viable strategies that have similar EVs. But this is one of those spots where the ability to pot when you have just a huge one pair overpair advantage, and you can make your opponent fold so much stuff, and you can get a lot of value with that portion of your range. You need to use that to your advantage. Otherwise you are making a mistake. I guess I'll leave it at that. But I hope you guys enjoyed. And then on the more dynamic ace high boards, then make sure that you're potting it's really single component hands. So like dry ace ace, a decent amount of your dry sets, dry ace king jack and ace queen jack that don't love seeing turns as much, and then you're half potting if you want to use 2 sizings, which I think you probably should on those boards. Half potting stuff that is kind of more polarized range. I know it sounds weird to say that top set is not part of a polarized range, but dry top set on a board as dynamic as ace 10-9 two-tone, when you're facing a button open and call 3-bet range, it's not quite as crushing of a hand on a board like that. Top set, that is. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. And I look forward to any questions or comments, the usual. And I'll see you next time. This is Phil Galfond for RunAtOnce.com. Take care, guys.